For our group's capstone, we explored the possibilities and implications of purchasing offsets as part of UNC's climate action plan in general. First, we'll review our main goals and objectives of the project before recapping our initial research and exploring the results from our student, staff, and faculty surveys. Then we'll discuss the multi-criteria analysis we developed for evaluating potential offsets, and then wrap up with some example projects and recommendations. So obviously our client is Sustainable Carolina. Through our research, we've helped to work with them to advance their goals of reducing the university's environmental footprint. However, this cannot be done without purchasing carbon offsets. Other universities that are net zero purchase carbon offsets as part of their portfolio. Throughout the semester, we've been conducting comprehensive literary reviews of best practices pertaining to carbon offsets and evaluated climate action plans of other public and private universities throughout the United States. We're also able to speak to representatives of Second Nature and other directors of sustainability universities to gather more information. And then in order to gauge community support and acceptability of our potential offsets that we want to purchase, we developed surveys to gauge student, staff, and faculty opinions. And then we combine these results with our multi-criteria analysis to suggest potential projects and future recommendations, and then updated our handbook.
So first, what are carbon offsets? Carbon offsets are those projects that reduce or remove greenhouse gases, usually measured in CO2. Here's a couple of types that we're going to go over. Marketable, follow established protocols, administered by major registries, and usually listed on markets. Peer-reviewed are those that are produced by one institution and reviewed by a peer institution, and those are usually the ones that are used by universities. Innovative ones are those usually in-house that don't necessarily align with existing carbon market protocols. And under standard universities, usually these are used to offset scope 3, whichever part is.
Then these are just some examples of different student and faculty programs that schools run to raise money for carbon offsets. First is the commuter programs, which just adds a voluntary price onto parking passes, which App State and UNCG use. And then Weber State does the cool thing where theirs is a matching program. So the sustainability office will match however much everyone that gets purchased. Then there's the sponsored travel programs where when like faculty or students are doing university, well, mostly for faculty, are doing university funded travel, they can send their itinerary to the sustainability office who will estimate the cost of offsetting their trip, which Oregon State does as a voluntary program. And then Colorado State, Arizona State, and Maryland do it as a mandatory program. And then the cool things are Arizona State does the same like set fee of $20 for of just a $20 fee for domestic and international. Colorado State does 10 for domestic, 20 for international. And then Maryland just does a set of like 0.02 of a cent per mile for travel.
So although many offset programs are well-intentioned, not all carbon offset programs are created equal, with some being more climate impactful, cost-driven, or focus more on co-benefits. But we want to ensure that UNC invests in the best quality offset. So we developed a set of criteria, which we like to call impacts.
Yeah, so we transitioned from the original criteria that was in the handbook to our own according to our multi-criteria analysis. And so the acronym we have for this one is IMPACT. Our first variable is independent third-party ranking. So these carbon credit ratings agencies and using their extensive analysis in helping UNC make a decision, because a lot of their work is like a lot more in depth than UNC might be able to do for a given offset project. Then monitoring and transparency, like how much information is available about this project, how well is the upkeep on this information, permanence, are these offsets long lasting, are they going to be reversed in a soon time frame, additionality, would the offsets have occurred without the development of the project itself, co-benefits, which Paige will talk about a little bit more in a minute, and then targeted location. We'll also talk about this more later, but is this location what's meeting the needs and desires of the stakeholders at UNC?
Yeah, so during the student, staff, and faculty survey, we asked what co-benefits or priorities are most important to them. And from that, we found that they really want a hands-on say in the offsets. So we could do that through educational and research opportunities, local environmental benefits,
and strengthen partnerships with those local organizations.
All right, so I'm not going to go too in depth on the survey results because that would comprise a lot of the last presentation, but we did want to just give an overview of our most important findings. We did conduct one student survey and one faculty and staff. We received 277 total student responses and 38 faculty and staff responses. And the goal of this survey was to just assess, engage general support and sentiment around carbon offsets, as well as the threat of climate change and UNC's sustainability plan in general. We hosted 2 webinars to get the student survey results. First, we administered the survey, and then we did a brief information session on carbon offsets in general and provided a few examples of carbon offset projects. And then the staff were sent these surveys via their department chairs. But first, we wanted to identify some baseline knowledge and education gaps. So we found that 70% of students and 86% of faculty and staff rated the threat of climate change as a 7 or above on a scale of 1 to 10, which is great. People are really recognizing the real threat of climate change on campus. But when we asked about carbon offsets, 60% of students and 24% of faculty and staff had no idea what a carbon offset was. And then we also know that community involvement is very important to Sustainable Carolina's broad goals. So when we asked students and faculty and staff what their familiarity was with UNC's climate action plan, on average, the students' ranking was 2.73, and faculty and staff was 2.82 on a scale of 0 to 10. So this really highlights that while we have the community support and people are rallied around the fact that we have real issues here that we're facing with the climate, student education and broader community involvement will be really important in getting everyone on board with not only Sustainable Carolina's climate action goal, but with the carbon offset portfolio as well. So then we kind of asked them a little bit more specifics about carbon offsets. So we have 2 graphs here showing their general sentiments. We have the student on the left, faculty and staff on the right. Unfortunately, we found that 48% of students and 68% of faculty and staff have somewhat negative perceptions towards carbon offsets. We calculated the negative perception as those who found them to be a form of greenwashing, those who think they are a temporary fix until a better solution presents itself, and then people who don't care at all about them. So unfortunately, this is a pretty significant portion of the faculty and staff, and then a pretty significant portion of the students. And we found that only 17% of the students and 3% of faculty and staff feel they're a practical tool for achieving climate goals. And while this is not necessarily what we were looking for, it does just highlight the importance of education and getting everyone on board behind the carbon offset strategy. And then we also asked them a few educational initiatives they thought could be helpful. And I know we just talked about this with the last presentation a little bit, but some of the main ideas pushed forward were more educational CLE events. As we said, you need 16 of these to graduate. And so we can get people coming in voluntarily. It'll get them kind of more on board with learning the concepts that we're teaching in those CLEs. And then some other ideas kind of on the same vein is creating a module for freshman orientation on sustainability. We could also incorporate a unit into the College Thriving course, which is a mandatory freshman course, or going a step further in requiring everyone to take a sustainability course as part of the gen ed curriculum could be a great way to make sustainability learning part of every student's Carolina experience. And then one idea that someone said that we thought would be interesting to note was a climate action week, which could also be condensed to more of a climate action day. And this could just be highlighting various climate threat issues as well as UNC's CAP and just kind of getting everybody educated and informed on what we're doing here to fight climate change. And then finally, I'm not going to go too deeply into this because we will be covering it more in depth later in the presentation, but we did provide 5 example projects of carbon offsets for the students and faculty and staff with a brief description. So those projects were the Gaston County Landfill Project, which of course is located here in North Carolina. Then we had a Tradewater Thailand project, which is working on destroying refrigerant in Thailand. Then there was an agroforestry and reforestation project in Peru, a Tennessee Nature Conservancy project, and then finally a native energy build your own offset portfolio. So we gave a brief project description, then had them rank from 1 to 5. And so the broad findings from here was that students value location the most. An overwhelming majority placed the Gaston County project as number 1. And so that shows people really want to have a North Carolina impact. The second major thing that students valued was the actual impact of the project. So that's looking at the co-benefits as well as the emissions reductions. And then finally, feasibility. So is this project possible? Does it make sense for us to do it? Faculty and staff, we found a few different things that they valued. Primarily, they valued feasibility, practicality, and cost effectiveness. And then they also wanted long-term solutions. So permanence is an important factor when we're considering what faculty and staff value. And then finally, location. They did value kind of more local projects, not as much as the students, but still worth noting.
So yeah, next we'll get into the multi-criteria rubric that we developed. So we're hoping that this rubric could be applied to most projects that UNC would be interested in. And we considered results from the survey and general good practices for carbon offsets when we developed this. So when we did make some changes based off a meeting with a Second Nature representative, mainly we removed the cost category because we were worried that it might impact some of the other categories, specifically like location. So yeah, we have third-party ranking, so be from Calyx or other third-party ranking. Permanence, is it permanent? Additionality, would it have occurred otherwise? And we've gone sort of through these before. And we put the 5 example projects from the surveys through the multi-criteria. Here's a little bit more in depth about what each category means. For location, we're prioritizing North Carolina, then the American Southeast, and for the lowest ranking for outside United States. Yeah, transparency is the most vague category. Which basically is information publicly available, is easy to access.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the example projects and the ones that we recommend and the ones that we don't recommend. So we have 3 main ones that we do recommend. In first place, we have the Gaston County landfill project. Like we said, students really value locality, and this one is in North Carolina. And it also had a pretty good score on our rubric. 55% of students ranked it number 1 in the survey, and 40% of staff ranked it number 1 in the survey. It has, like I said with the rubric, it has a good amount of, or has a good score for the permanence, additionality, there's proven emission reduction. And I think that, yeah, overall, in terms of like student support and good score, that's why it's in first place. Second place, we have Tradewater Thailand 3 with the CFC 12 destruction. So this is another chemical or like emission destruction project, which is really good for the permanence. Also, it's pretty clear that additionality is highly scored because it wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it's a very clear, like, just for carbon offset project as a score of 3.4. It is located in Thailand, so that's why we have a lower score for that part since it's not local. It still has pretty good support from students and staff. Overall, it is the highest quality option, like technically in terms of additionality and actually like securing the emissions. But just since we want to take in student staff, like their preferences, that's why it's in number 2, because it's not in North Carolina. And then number 3, we have the, let me move this out of the way, I can't read it. The Jubilacion Segura Agroforestry and Reforestation Project. This still had like a pretty good score of 2.18. It is located in Peru. So in terms of locality, it is international, and it also didn't have like an amazing amount of student support, but it is kind of like neutral. And then in terms of one thing that we really thought was good about this project was the co-benefits. It really does a good job of working with local communities and the local farmers of the cacao farms that it works on. And they plant native species. I believe on the website it said they plant like around 33 different native species of plants to the area, and 11 of those species are endangered. So it's really good in terms of biodiversity, and it helps with building up the soil nutrients because there's a lot of monoculture in the area. So it's really good for the co-benefits, and that's why it's in 3rd place. Sorry, I don't know how to go. Okay, and then so our non-recommended projects, we have the Tennessee Nature Conservancy with a score of 1.9. Even though this is local-ish, it's in like the Southeast region, and it did have like pretty good support from students and staff. Ultimately, there were additionality and permanence concerns because it is a forestry project and it had kind of like a vague emission reduction strategy. Ultimately, we just didn't think that it was transparent enough and good enough for us to put in our recommended projects. And then finally, the native energy build your own offset portfolio. It had very split like support from students. Like 44.6% of students ranked it last, but 33% of staff ranked it first. So we didn't really know how to rank that in terms of like support. But also the location and project type are totally like up in the air and variable since it's a build your own program. So we can't really evaluate that with our rubric because there's not really any like cold hard data for us to evaluate. So ultimately we thought it was too broad for us to recommend since it's unpredictable for UNC's strategic needs. And then we have 4 final conclusions for our project. Number 1 is UNC's offset strategy must be both technically rigorous, which kind of ties into our multi-criteria rubric, and socially grounded, which ties into our survey. Secondly, high quality offsets, those with strong additionality, permanence, and transparency are essential for maintaining the integrity of UNC's climate commitments. And then again, students, staff, and faculty really value locality, visibility, and educational opportunities. So that really emphasizes the importance of finding a good quality, technically rigorous offset that also, if possible, is able to resonate with the campus community and get some sort of educational initiative going. And then, like we mentioned, we have been working with Second Nature and learning a lot about like what they do in terms of helping universities meet their carbon neutrality goals. So we would really recommend working with them in the future to either create or find an offset program that meets these standards. I know that's might be something that's going on next semester, but yeah, we think that they're a great organization to work with. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong about this, but I think that they've worked with all of the schools that have reached carbon neutrality in North Carolina. So yeah. And then lastly, thank you to Melanie and Dr. Van Doren for all of your help. Any questions?